You have a fiduciary duty as a board to help enforce the governing documents of the association. And in doing that, on occasion, there are homeowners who simply violate the CC&Rs by doing something inappropriate, and you have the requirement to get that handled. Now, most of the time, it's you call your manager on the phone and say, Mrs. Homeowner over here got a problem going on, write them a letter. And of course, it gets taken care of. Well, the real way you handle that is kind of critical to keeping happy homeowners. And how you communicate with homeowners is a big deal so you can keep the flow going, do your duty, and not upset people unduly. How do you do that? You don't. Just let them have their violations. I'm too tired to deal with this stuff. I get it. But you know, the fact is that there's different ways of handling it. What the Community Associations Institute is starting to recommend is that we make personal contact. Make a telephone call to the resident in that unit, be it the renter or the owner, and explain what's going on in a very polite way. That really is a good door opener to get the conversation had. The attorney on the other hand is going to say, but you have to document it, otherwise you haven't got clear documentation, so you need to send them a letter. Well, why couldn't you have a phone call and say, we're going to follow this phone call up with a letter to you because that's part of our requirements, we have to send you a letter. Then you've done both things. You've been thoughtful to them, you've shared with them and had a back and forth conversation about the violation. They might even tell you, you know, I didn't know I was in violation, I'm sorry, I'll take corrective action immediately. You hang up, you still want to send the letter that says, thank you, it was great talking to you, this will confirm our conversation, you've been notified of this violation and you've agreed to take care of it and we appreciate that. And now you've done both. You've had the phone conversation to make it pleasant and you've had the strict letter that's now in the record. Yes? Okay, so his board's method is by doing walkthroughs periodically and then writing up the violation letters following that walkthrough, and then they all get a letter and it seems to work. And I applaud that because there are ways to make it work. Can any board member make that call, or is it always the manager? And the answer is your choice, but it's not an arbitrary choice. I think it's a choice you have to make together as a board. We're going to deal with our violations in this manner, and we agree this is the manner we're going to do business. Most of the time, most boards want to stay arm's length from the problem, because truly, when the president signs that letter or the violations committee chairman signs that letter, it's not that person who is unhappy with or pointing out the violation. That person's just signing the letter. The board is the one who's authorizing the letter to go out, and so I don't want the homeowner being unhappy with this particular board member because this particular board member signed the letter. It's not that board member's fault. It's the board that made the decision on how we're going to do business. The same thing applies to that phone call. If Mr. Board member or committee member makes the phone call and now he's got an enemy because he didn't speak exactly right and didn't express himself right, and now that neighbor's unhappy, then maybe that doesn't work well. Who's to make the phone call? As a board, you might decide that, you know what, maybe in our association the phone call doesn't work well. We prefer the letter writing thing. And then it's a matter of how do you write the letter so that it's as stern as it needs to be and it's as soft as it can be to help them see we're not angry at you, we're just trying to get this problem resolved. And if you structure it right, a letter writing thing will work fine. I don't think board members ought to make the phone calls. I think manager ought to. But now, again, if you've got 15 violations, you're coming to me as your manager and saying, Steve, make 15 phone calls on my behalf, and coincidentally, each phone call takes 5 or 10 minutes. You've just taken up hours of my time, and I'm not sure I can handle that. So there's again, a balancing act for each board. If the board member volunteers, I know that neighbor, I'll be happy to go talk to him about it, and then the letter never gets generated, shame on the board, because you have to have, again, a procedure in place. We're happy to have you go talk to your friend or your neighbor that you're aware of. Please advise them of this. And then as soon as you've done that, would you be sure you contact management to get the letter written, or whatever your procedure is. Typically, management does the letter. But you know, each board is different. Again, your board may have somebody on the board who generates those letters and puts them out that way. In most associations, it falls back on management to actually write the letters, and someone has to direct that action. We prefer it as a management team that everything is done by a board of directors, not an individual board member. So as a board, you set policy. You say, as in our association, here's how we're going to do business. You qualify that, and then everybody on the table, including the manager, sees how you're going to do business and does business that way. And then it flows very nicely. So in the case of violations, you agree as a board, we're going to try our best to be soft-spoken. Here's the plan. When we first see a violation, a board member has to witness the violation, and then we're going to authorize that board member, if that board member chooses to make a phone call to that person to start the process going. And then that board member is going to be asked to send an email back to all the other board members and management that they took that action. Now, that works very well. But if that board member says, I can't, that homeowner and I do not get along, so, or it's my best friend and I can't talk to him about this violation they have, then you, again, as a board, you deal with how we're going to deal with that. Let's plan it so that that board member, having seen the action, is authorized to contact the manager by email or by telephone and say, would you please get this handled for me? That's a policy decision you'd make. Sometimes the policy decision is, no, I don't care who sees it. It comes back to the board table at a board meeting, and we'll decide it then. It's a policy you make, and that's part of what you do as a board. Part of your administrative thing is at a meeting, an open meeting, you decide on how we're going to do business and make the policies so that you're working as a team and doing the team effort on that. Can an individual homeowner see a violation, report that to management, and then have management email, ding, 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 email the board and get the board to take action on it? Well, again, if you have policies in place, the manager could email the board and tell the board how the action that, based on your policy, has been taken, but to email the board asking them to make a decision on an issue when you're not at a board meeting is against the law. As a board, make a policy on how you want violations dealt with. I do recommend, by the way, that Mrs. Homeowner, ordinary homeowner, does not get to call the manager and complain about Mrs. Neighbor. They may put it in writing, so they've signed it and said, I am Mrs. Homeowner, I'm complaining about my neighbor, Mrs. Neighbor, and here it is in writing, because you will find if they make the phone call to the manager and they come back to him, and Mrs. Homeowner, Mrs. Neighbor says, but I never did that. You go back to Mrs. Homeowner who made the complaint, she denies the whole thing. You started this whole falderall of problem without any qualification. Or Mrs. Homeowner says, I want to report this to you, but don't tell anybody I said anything. Sorry, can't do that. If you want to report a problem, it needs to be in writing, and then you can send it off to the manager. Now, the manager may need to have a board member or a violations committee member that the manager coordinates with to see if there's an actionable item here to take. And that can happen between the manager and a board member. I'm the guy that says I would like it to be able to remain anonymous as long as they're willing to sign the letter, so I have somebody I can come back to and I can say as the manager, you reported this to me. Here it is in writing. It's between the two of us. I'm not broadcasting out to all the homeowners or even the one who had the violation that you're the complainer. I want to know that I've got something I can qualify back to. So that's why I say it should be in writing and it should be signed. If the homeowner is walking through the property and happens to pass by a board member who's walking through the property, can they make that report right then and there and be done with it? I don't think so. I think it's nice that the board member's taking a nice walk and enjoying the scenery, and I think it's nice the homeowner saw the board member can have a nice conversation, but the board member ought to come back and say, you know what? Here's how our board, or our association, to say it even better, here's how our association handles this kind of thing. Please follow that procedure. So you tell them, we need to have it in writing. Could you go back to your house and write an email to me about this? In her case, Mrs. Homeowner caught her on the street and told her of the violation or the problem she wants resolved. She says, okay, the the policy of the association is that you put this in writing. Would you write me an email on this matter? And then she says, okay, now I've got this email. What do I do now? And the difference is, okay, so if the email was something that requires immediate action, then you have to figure out, okay, what's the policy of the association? Do I have the authority personally to take action on this issue? If I do, then take the action. You've got it in writing now. If you don't, then you'll forward that email on to either your manager or the other board members, however that works. Keep in mind that when you do the email thing, and I'm in favor of that whole email law that says don't email between meetings, and I'm not in favor of that law because it does stifle you, and I get that. But you have to have some communication. What you cannot do is have email discussions where you're deciding on things that should be done at a board meeting. If you have an urgent item come up and you need to discuss it, call an emergency board meeting and discuss it and do it properly. It's real easy to do. So when you, as the individual, get this message, then follow the policy that your board has established, which might be pass the email to manager and let the manager help me decide how to deal with it. The manager will give me guidance and I'll know what to do. The manager might see it as this is an emergency and immediately start taking action for you or direct you on how to take action. The manager might say, this can be put off to the next board meeting. I'll put it in the record so it gets on the agenda. I just think it needs to be in writing because it protects you. But not every case is going to work for that. Again, that's where you have to look at it and see what works best. And it's going to be different for different circumstances. If there's an emergency situation here, let's say, for example, the parking problem comes up, they've blocked my garage, and I can't get out of my own driveway, and I'm going to be late to work if I don't get my car out of my garage or my driveway. I want an emergency situation taken care of here. I'm going to make a phone call to the board member, get something done about this crazy neighbor of mine who constantly blocks my driveway. And the board member is going, well, what am I supposed to do about this? First of all, put it to me in writing. I just pissed off another homeowner. I mean, you get my point. You got to use reasonableness here. So there might be a case where you take the phone call, you go out and you look at it, yep, that car's blocking. You knock on the neighbor's door and say, come on, your neighbor's unhappy here. Get the car moved. And the guy may decide to flip you off or whatever, and you have this argument going on. There's going to be bad situations. But it is something where if you set a policy, try to work within that policy and have it as a policy that you work with as a board. And certainly as boards change, policies may change, but at least you have a way that works. Most of the attorneys I've talked to have said policies on how the board is going to function is a policy that affects just the board and therefore doesn't need to be as a rule that affects the homeowners. I do think that if you've got a rule that says violations will only be accepted in writing, addressed in this manner, you now have affected the homeowner and how they can report it. That becomes a rule, not a policy. And so if you're going to change that rule, you need to do a 30-day comment period like you would for any rule that affects the homeowner. But if it's a policy on how we as a board are going to deal with that violation once it got to us, then it might be a policy thing. Again, if it's going to affect the homeowner, it becomes a rule, and therefore it needs to have that same 30-day notice that rules have to have. Where are these policies written and documented and memorized and all that stuff? What is the official document of the association? CC&Rs. What else? Bylaws. Bylaws. What else? Rules and regulations. And what else? Minutes. So when you come up with these rule changes or methods of, if you make an amendment to the CC&Rs, we all know, right, that we have to have that voted by the people to get that change made so it's documented and the CC&Rs are right there. You're going to change the rule, you make the decision to change the rule, you put it out for 30-day comment, it comes back, it becomes a rule, it gets a part of the policy, it becomes in the rule book or in the list of rules. But how do we know when that all took place and how it happened? You did it at a board meeting. You only conduct business at board meetings, so that rule change must show up in the minutes someplace. As you make the change to any policies, it ought to be documented in the minutes of the meeting where you discussed it, because all business is done at a qualified board meeting. So my recommendation on any policy changes is it's not done by a motion of the board or by a line or two of text in the minutes. It ought to be by resolution. A resolution being different from a motion in that a resolution kind of starts out saying, whereas we have the authority to do this, and whereas we have the need to do this, and therefore we're going to resolve to do this. And it kind of qualifies what's going on. So in a rule change or a policy change, you start out by saying, whereas the board has the authority to make policy changes, and whereas we have a need for this rule change for these reasons, and then, therefore, we're going to make this rule change, and here's the rule change. And it's so well documented by resolution that shows up in the minutes, and I recommend that all resolutions be separately maintained. So you extract the resolution out of the minutes, place it on a separate piece of paper so that you can put a book of resolutions together for easy reference years down the road. But certainly at least have it in the minutes. I've seen associations where their method was, at the meeting, the resolution was prepared in advance by someone, the manager, a board member, the attorney, and it was a separately typed document. And in the minutes, it said, a motion was made to accept the resolution number XYZ regarding this situation. The resolution was accepted, see attached. And so the resolution now becomes attached to the minutes, but it's also separately maintained so you can have a book of resolutions to help keep the ability to look things up quickly easy. And there's, again, it's all a matter of different ways, but again, your minutes are the official document of what transpired at a meeting. You only conduct business at meetings, so you, thank you, I'm running out of time. So you get it down to where everything's documented in the minutes. When you approve minutes at a meeting, you're making sure that we didn't forget to put something in the minutes that was something we talked about and acted on. Now, there'll be times when you come up with, you know, I think we ought to change this policy or this rule. What do y'all think? And we talk about it for a few minutes as a board, and then we realize we don't have enough information yet. We can't quite make the decision. Let's hold off on this. Why don't we do some more investigation and see how critical the need is? The minutes could say, there was discussion regarding this policy change the board is considering. No action was taken. They need to gather more information. At least it's documented in the minutes that there was discussion on this rule change, even though no action was taken. I think everything you talk about needs to be somehow documented in the minutes so it isn't forgotten.